In the 1990s, archaeologists excavated two remarkable early Bronze Age timber enclosures off the coast of Norfolk in England. Called Holme I and Holme II, the first is often referred to as Seahenge. Like many prehistoric monuments, these two circles appear to have been built for ritual purposes and possibly for a burial. Now, a new paper published in the GeoJournal suggests that folklore, together with known environmental changes in the Bronze Age, may provide a more detailed explanation of what actually happened in these two timber enclosures. In this week's Ancient History News, I discussed this new research on Seahenge, as well as an intervisibility analysis that's being carried out on 151 megaliths and 5 prehistoric settlements in the Gor River Valley in southeastern Spain. New studies suggest Seahenge may have been built as a cuckoo enclosure. A new study into two early Bronze Age oak timber enclosures found in Norfolk, England, suggests that these circles were erected as ritual responses to environmental change. The research published in the GeoJournal takes an interdisciplinary approach combining archaeology, archaeoastronomy, and folklore. Called Holme I and Holme II, the timber enclosures were discovered in 1998 when they were exposed at low tide. Holme I is also popularly referred to as Seahenge. They were built in what was a coastal marsh habitat at the time and were protected from the sea by sand dunes. This area at Holme next the sea is now an intertidal zone. Traces of roughly 100 similar timber circles have been found in Britain and usually date to between the late Neolithic and the early Bronze Age. Let's start by discussing the layout of the monuments in Norfolk. Holme I had an oval shape and measured 6 by 7 meters. Its 55 timber posts had been placed in a trench surrounding an upturned tree stump sitting in a pit. These posts were made from split oak trunks with the bark facing outwards and, on one exception, with the bark facing inwards. They stood at between 2 and 3 meters above ground level. It seems that the posts numbered 35 and 37 in the southwest formed an axis with the post in the northeast labelled 65, an axis that roughly aligns with the sunrise and sunset on the summer and winter solstices. Dendrochronology showed that the timbers were felled in the spring of 2049 BCE, so it's more likely that the oval was intentionally oriented towards the sunrise on the summer solstice rather than the sunset on the winter solstice. After its excavation, Holme I was removed for preservation. Holme II is still in situ and measures 13.2 meters in diameter. It's around 100 meters to the east of Holme I and consists of an eccentric oval palisade with an arc of timber posts 0.5 meters inside it and 2 horizontal timbers lying in its center surrounded by an oak wattle fence. Unlike Holme I, the vertical posts have had their bark stripped away. However, this is still intact in the horizontal oak timbers in the center. These two central timbers have a northeast to southwest orientation and have hollows carved out of them. Holme I does not appear to have been maintained, so it was probably used for one particular event. Holme II is thought to have been a mortuary monument. It can be difficult to determine if folk tales or myths associated with prehistoric structures have any value in understanding the monuments themselves or the society that created them. Often such stories are not as ancient as the monuments, but were created many hundreds or even thousands of years later. However, as I've discussed in a few previous videos, and as is mentioned in this paper, there's evidence that some stories have very ancient origins. For example, celestial myths seem to date back to the Paleolithic, and Indo-European folk tales may date back to the Bronze Age. In Britain, there's evidence that environmental changes have been recorded in folk tales, specifically those related to the submergence and emergence of coastal areas in Scotland. So the idea that folklore may explain the purpose of Holme I and Holme II is not such a wild idea. When the timbers were felled, Britain was experiencing a mega drought. That's referred to as the 4.2 Ka aridification event, one of the worst climatic events of the Holocene. It's thought to have been responsible for social upheaval in the Bronze Age civilizations of Egypt, the Indus Valley, and Mesopotamia. There are many examples in prehistory and history of people's ritualistic response to difficult environmental conditions, so it's likely that in 2049 BCE, communities in Britain carried out ceremonies to try to get some sort of control over what was happening. The author of the paper suggests that the astronomical alignments of Holme I and Holme II hint at connections to the planet Venus, which is related to ancient folklore of the cuckoo and the warrior champions of goddesses. Let's delve a little deeper. In folklore from places as geographically distant as Britain and China, the cuckoo, a sub-Saharan species that migrates annually to Eurasia for breeding, was associated with fertility. This prevalence suggests a Proto-Indo-European origin for such symbolism. Certain themes in the folklore of the cuckoo include the idea that it winters in the otherworld and returns every summer to fertilize the earth with its song. There are several Iron Age artifacts which connect goddesses with the cuckoo, and various annual traditions in Britain include cuckoo rituals performed in the summer. It was also associated with many Bronze and Iron Age societies that spoke Indo-European languages. The myth of the pent cuckoo has been recorded in several counties in England and tells the story of a group of wise men who don't want the summer to end, so keep a cuckoo in a thorn bush or some sort of enclosure. However, the cuckoo escapes, taking summer with it. In one particular story, an unfledged cuckoo is trapped, but it eventually gets its feathers and flies away. It's possible that this myth is commemorated in the names of fields such as Cuckoo Pen, Cuckoo Bush, and Cuckoo Hill. Perhaps these were locations where communities tried to trap a cuckoo in a ritual to stop the summer from ending. Place names have also been surveyed in the past to see how many are named after the cuckoo, and there are many. Interestingly, 25 standing stones were found to have the word cuckoo in their name. A myth connected to the Calais stones in the Outer Hebrides says that at sunrise on the summer solstice, when the cuckoo sings, something walks down the avenue leading to the central circle. The word something probably had its origins in a pre-Gaelic language and can be translated as the shining or pure or white one, perhaps an epithet of God. In Welsh, Cornish, and Breton, the adjective Gwen means shining, white, blessed, and holy, and Gwenna is the name for the planet Venus, meaning the shining or pure or white one. So scholars have suggested that the something referred to in the Calais cuckoo myth is actually Venus. Many prehistoric monuments in Britain are aligned with summer and winter solstices, which are annual, and the lunar maximum and minimum standstill declinations that have an 18.6-year cycle. Venus has maximum and minimum standstill declinations that fall between the solstitial and lunar limits and has an 8-year cycle. Over the last 4,000 years, these have occurred between the 29th of October and the 6th of November, which could mean that Samhain traditions are connected to Venus. Venus also has a longer 251-year cycle, which is also recorded in the Calais stones. This is not an exhaustive list of cuckoo myths and ancient associations with the planet Venus. The paper has many more, but the point is there's an intriguing possibility that the planet Venus and the cuckoo were inextricably linked to ancient practices regarding fertility and the seasons. Many European hero myths may have been derived from folklore related to the cuckoo. There also appears to be an association with ritual murders of these cuckoo warriors in Celtic Britain and Ireland. Stories talk of ancient warriors or kings being ritually sacrificed to clear the sins of their people. These warrior champions of goddesses symbolized male fertility and protection. Legend has it that the kings of Tara in Ireland were ritually sacrificed after they had reigned for a fixed term, and this was often carried out on Samhain. References to this term vary, but it appears to have been 7 years. However, in some cases, abdicating at the end of 7 years was enough to avoid their fate. This may indicate that 8 years was the actual number related to the ritual, which coincides with the cycle of Venus. The author of the paper suggests suggests that Holme I was specifically created for a ritual in the summer of 2049 BCE to trap a cuckoo and trick it into thinking it was in its winter abode. This being a response to the colder climate that had become disastrous in Europe and the Near East by that point. The author also suggests that Holme II was constructed as a mortuary monument to enclose a sacrificed king. Since folklore largely associates sacrificial rituals with Samhain, but the monuments were constructed in the summer, it's possible the enclosure was for someone that had previously been killed or was about to be in a few months' time. However, it seems more likely that the construction of the monument would have coincided with the offering, perhaps being carried out earlier than the fixed term, specifically because of the failure of crops and the dire situation the people were in. The beaker culture arrived in Britain around 2500 BCE. These Bronze Age immigrants had steppe ancestry and largely displaced the indigenous Neolithic farmers. They became the ancestors of late Iron Age tribal societies in northern Britain and Ireland. Although the beaker culture's beliefs are not well understood, the later Iron Age Celtic religion developed around a fertility goddess and her male counterpart, both themes that were popular in pre-Christian Europe and were often associated with the cuckoo, the summer, and fertility. It's possible that Holme I and Holme II were constructed by the beaker people and embodied Proto-Indo-European belief systems that were to continue into the Iron Age. The paper goes into a lot more detail, so it's worth reading if you're interested in finding out more. This video is a simple summary of what is a very complex subject. It gives many more examples of folklore and proof of cultural continuity in DNA studies, and it also discusses the archaeoastronomy in detail, including a possible connection to the Pleiades as well. The link is in the description below. Intervisibility analysis carried out of the Gor River Valley megaliths in Spain. The Gor River Valley in Andalusia has one of the largest clusters of dolmens in Europe. At the end of the 19th century, 238 megalithic monuments were recorded there. Experts refer to the Gor Valley megaliths and those at the nearby Fardes River and Pasillo de Tabernas as being part of the southeast megalithic phenomenon of the Iberian Peninsula. This was a time in prehistory when megalithic funerary monuments were built with increasing density. Although limited research and radiocarbon testing have been carried out on the dolmens, the 11 radiocarbon dates that have been obtained show that some of these monuments were built between the late Neolithic and the final Copper Age. There's also evidence of reuse and remodeling in the Bronze Age. So it would appear that the Gor River megaliths were built over a long period of time, with successive generations choosing to bury their dead in the same way as their ancestors. Because this tradition was stretched out over millennia, the dolmens vary in style and in the construction techniques used. At the beginning of the 21st century, during an exercise to relocate the 238 megalithic monuments of the Gor Valley for the establishment of their legal protection, only 151 could be found, although LiDAR surveys show that others still exist, albeit buried or partly destroyed. On the ground, there appears to be a connection between the dolmens, geographical landmarks, and environmental resources, and there also appears to be a connection between the megalithic monuments themselves. In an effort to quantify these relationships within the visual landscape, a team of researchers carried out an analysis of the 151 preserved megaliths and 5 nearby settlements. The settlements are Fuentecilla I and II, Las Angosturas, Solana I, and El Cotillo. These have been dated to the Chalcolithic, and although dating evidence for the dolmens is limited, by the time the settlements were established, all of the dolmens would have existed within the landscape. Therefore, any visual connections are likely to have been intentional. Several different analyses were included in the study. Of course, there are several obstacles to such studies, including natural and anthropogenic changes to the landscape over the last few millennia. This map shows the lines of intervisibility between the settlements and the megaliths. The blue lines mark relationships within a 3-kilometer radius, and the red lines mark relationships within a 5-kilometer radius. As you can see, there are connections between many of the megaliths and the settlements of Fuentecilla I and II, and between other megaliths and the settlements of Solana I and El Cotillo. The peripheral megalithic monuments that are not a part of this network do have different characteristics to those centralized on the Gor Valley, so may have been a part of a separate territory or funerary system. There's just one megalithic monument close to the settlement of Las Angosturas, and there's no visual connection between them. However, it appears that other dolmens did once exist between the settlement and the extant monument, which would have created a visual connection. Overall, the researchers found that the central Gor Valley was connected by fortified sites and a sacred network of megaliths. In some cases, megaliths were placed close to and oriented towards geographical landmarks rather than being in physical proximity to each other. But this phenomenon wasn't found as much as at other sites in Iberia. In fact, at other sites, geographical landmarks seem to have been far more important than the intervisibility of megaliths. That's it. If you enjoyed this video, please hit the like button. Thank you to my patrons and channel members for all of your support, and I'll see you next time.